Good afternoon, namaste, ni hao, diagwith, kia ora. Ko ho te manga, ko liwhi te awa, to tamaroa te waka, ko arani te iwi, ko Neill O'Reilly tako ingoa, he tumoaki ahau I te kura o Kowloon Junior School. It's my pleasure to be here. I left Kowloon and it was about 32, left Hong Kong, 32 degrees, temperature about 95% humidity and raining. And I've come to Auckland and it's raining just a little bit cooler though. So it's lovely to be back here and I'm hoping that this thing's going to work. My home is now in Hong Kong. My building's just in the left-hand corner there, looking over beautiful Victoria Harbour in Hong Kong. And Kowloon Junior School's just past that very tall building in the middle of Hong Kong itself, very different to where I left from Christchurch. It's 900 children, 900 wonderful children, in a multi-storey building. That space you can see there is basically where the children play, all of our 900 children. We've got one sky garden and then that's it. So it's very different to the wide open spaces we had when I left Waitakere School. 100 staff from all over the world, predominantly they're from the UK, Scotland, Canada, Australia, and a few more New Zealanders coming into the mix. A number of Indian staff and then a whole lot of local staff. And they're wonderfully passionate people. And yes, they're working at an international school, but if I was going to say, are they significantly different to the staff we had at Waitakere and Christchurch? Not really. They're really passionate about children's learning and they're all there because they want to make a difference in the lives of the learners. I'm one of the principals at English Schools Foundation. It's the largest medium education provider in Hong Kong. So 22 schools, 17,500 students, and 9 of those are primary schools. It's a not-for-profit organisation. Really important for me going to Hong Kong, I didn't have to sell my soul. It's a not-for-profit inclusive organisation. So the only requirement for children to get into any one of our schools is that they can access the English language. So we have a high amount of children with special learning needs as well as the whole gamut. So it's a wonderful place to be and not too different to what we had here in New Zealand. So some of you will have heard me talk before about co-teaching, and what I'd like to share with you today is my emerging understandings that I've had since I've been at Hong Kong, especially around collaboration and the power of collaboration. It's going to be a challenge to squeeze it all into 2 45-minute sessions, so please bear with me. I've crashed this presentation 3 times, so this is my 3rd effort. You'd hope it'd be my best one, but it could be a jumbled one. Perry mentioned that I'm an HBDI trainer, so I'm going to confess that at the start because I became an HBDI trainer because it's so powerful and important in the work we do at our school. And Ned Herman was a chemical engineer and a drama major in the 1970s, and he was surprised at himself that one side of his brain was being a chemical engineer and the other side he loved music and drama. And he worked for General Electric, and he said to the bigwig of General Electric, can I use some research maybe to find out how the brain works? And it was at the time when they knew a little bit about the right-hand side of the brain and the left-hand side of the brain and the different hemispheres, and he came up with this concept, this visualization of what the brain is like and how our thinking is dominant in one way or another. And we use this a lot in our school when we're trying to build collaborative teams. Oh, sorry, and I was going to say there's lots of other ones there. I'm not saying this is the only one. Some of you will use Myers-Briggs, some will use DISC, some will use Balbin. I suggest whatever it is, you use something to help your teams to become more collaborative. So to give you some context, so I was principal at Windsor School, which is in Burwood in Christchurch. I started there in 2008 and the school was ready for a shift. They wanted to learn a bit more about how to support learning in the 21st century, hands-on learning, place-based curriculum, and collaborative practice. And I moved there, and we were having a great time. I had been visiting schools around the country, and I'd come across this notion of co-teaching and collaborative practice, and people doing things slightly differently with their environments, whether they were smashing open walls or whether they were purpose-built environments. So we were fortunate enough to be able to build a brand new space in our school. It was a role growth classroom, and instead of building one, we built 2, and we put a space in between with some big sliding doors, and I suppose you could call it a maker space or a play-based area. We just called it learning space. The only requirement for our teachers, if you wanted to work in that space, you had to be prepared to collaborate and work differently with the teacher next door. The doors had to stay open, and we would scaffold and support the teachers to try and make learning more meaningful for children. And I'll fess up right at the start that I think Teachers working on their own do a wonderful job, but I think it's a near-on impossible job. And just listening to the talk before, I think the notion that one person, one teacher, can meet the very dynamic needs of 25 to 30 children is almost an impossibility. So in the schools that I lead, I prefer to have 2 or more teachers so we can double or treble the possibility that we can tap into their talents and their skills and support them and challenge them. So coming back to the context, you'll know that in Christchurch we had the earthquakes of September 2010, and then more famously, unfortunately, February 2011, when the city was changed forever in so many ways. And those of you who are from Christchurch or have been back since, you'll know it's still trying to recover from that really devastating time, to rebuild and reinvent itself. And one of the positive things did come is that we were able to reconsider how teaching and learning might look in the environments that we were in. And you might recognise that face there, Hekia Prata, the Honourable Minister. We were herded out one Friday, we called it Black Friday afterwards, to Rolleston. It was quite fortuitous that it was a rural area because we were literally brought into a building and tagged like sheep or cattle and then herded off to 2 separate rooms. And we didn't realise at the time that if you got herded off to one room and sat down at your table like you are now, there were folders on it. What they didn't tell us to do was not to open the folders. But unfortunately, most people in the room, being inquisitive teachers, not being prepared to wait until they were told, opened the folders and they found out one of 3 things: closure, merger, or relocation. So it wasn't a particularly nice time. It literally felt like we were the cattle going in for the docking or the dipping. It certainly wasn't a good experience. And I know the people in the other room were quite happy. That changed things quite dramatically for us, because at Windsor School, what we were really surprised about, we went to that event thinking we were going to hear about what was happening in Christchurch. Our school had been fine. Our community was fine. We'd lost no students. In fact, our school was a hub for other schools. So it was really confusing to us why we'd been put into that room. But we had, and the bottom line is that we were going to be merged with Burwood School, 1.2 kilometres away, 100 years away, because they'd started 100 years before our school, and 1 community away. And it was not a popular choice with the Windsor community or the Burwood community. For my sins, I put my name up to be the principal of the merged school, and subsequently I became the principal of Waitakere School. At the same time, I was very fortunate to have the support of the CPPA to do some research around New Zealand and around the world, to have a look at collaborative practice, because I knew that what we were going into was so significantly different, particularly for one of the schools, that we actually needed to have some research and support. And at the same time, I was writing my thesis. So I gave myself quite a tall order and quite a lot to do in that time, but it was really worthwhile because writing my thesis was about what we were moving into. So I was living the experience. I travelled to these countries, and I would have to say and be really upfront about it, the ideas we developed are because of the generosity of the schools around New Zealand that I was able to visit and that our staff visited. And we were very fortunate at the time. As you probably know, Australia pumped a whole lot of money into their schools after the global financial crisis. So they were ahead of the game when it came to collaborative practice and reconceptualising teaching and learning. So we took all our staff to these schools, and I visited those probably on about 7 occasions to get ideas. I also went to Vancouver, which had some fascinating goings on at the time. What I noticed, though, that it wasn't about the physical environment, it was about how people were working within the space, and whether they were chopping a hole in the wall or they had a brand new purpose-built space, it was what they wanted to do inside the environment. So this is what we ended up with, Waitakere School, the School of Meandering Waters. A school built for 650 children, 6 learning studios, 110 children in each learning studio, 4 to 5 teachers. And we were fortunate back then, I don't know if it's changed, we were able to design in breakout learning areas, so we had 4 or 5 breakout learning areas around the space, around the outside. Quite a change for teachers who had been in a classroom by themselves up until this stage. And it was a stunning school, and I have to say I visited there in October last year when we came home, and I thought, man, what a stunning environment for children to learn. But it's what goes on inside the space that is most important. So, here's what I found were the key components to creating an effective collaborative teaching and learning environment. The 2 most important being that if you want a collaborative environment to work, or I'm going to take it back a step, If you want collaborative practice to happen in your school successfully, whether or not you've got co-teaching going on, so let's separate collaboration from co-teaching. If you want collaboration to be successful, the two most important points are at the top and the bottom. That there's shared beliefs and understandings about teaching and learning, about pedagogy, about the paradigm that's going on in your school, and that it's a student-centred environment. The next three most important were that there was skill development for teachers to learn how to work with one another. Because not surprisingly at training college, they teach teachers to work with children, not adults. So our staff needed some support. Well, the staff in my thesis, the people we surveyed said they needed some skill development. They wanted smart systems in place so they could do their job better. And I don't know about you, but it seems to me we're still using stupid systems. There's no systems people in the room, sponsors. It seems to me we're still reinventing the wheel in every school, and staff are spending an inordinate amount of time on systems that aren't so smart. But that's what they said they needed. They said they needed support for a transition from traditional practice to collaborative practice. And the next three were less important but still necessary. Strategies for how you're actually going to teach in the space, a change of structures school-wide, so CRT, employment, appraisal, and finally a knowledge about how to work in space and how environment can be the third teacher. So, here's the challenge. Most teachers in most New Zealand schools work by themselves in a classroom, and if they understand effective pedagogy, they probably do a good job. And I wouldn't want to disrespect the work they do, because they've been doing it for a long time. And can I just check around the room, how many people still have schools where you have one teacher in one classroom? There you go. And I'm sure they're doing a magnificent job on their own. Unfortunately, the statistics would tell us, or what we find out, is the children get a little bit of a different ride, because they go on a roller coaster ride through their education as each teacher redefines what the school believes and closes that private door and gets on with their private practice. So our children have a slightly rough ride, and certainly not as good a ride as they could have, because each teacher is reinventing the wheel and doing things in their own way, in their own place. So the suggestion is that what's most important is we create a foundation of shared beliefs and understandings, so that everyone in the school knows what this school is about, knows what defines your school. Is your school the most important thing is we're going to develop wonderful human beings? Is your school's most important thing that we're going to get really high scores on some test? What is it that makes your school tick? What's it that makes your school special? If your teachers understand that, and they understand effective pedagogy, then your children are going to be more successful. At our school, when I got to KGS, they had said that this vision for the school was success for every child. And I was challenged by that, because here I am coming to Hong Kong, and I knew that I had a certain mindset about what success might be, and I wondered what the parents would have thought about what success is. To give you context, in our school, 33% of our students, or 33 to 35%, are from Indian background. About 47% are from Chinese or local Hong Kong background, and all the rest are European. Now, I know that there was some different thinking going on about what success might mean, so we did very comprehensive activities to find out what success was. And what we came up with was 5 key principles, which were agency, achievement, respect, opportunity, and well-being. I'm going to say how delighted I was to be in Hong Kong, and the families were saying that well-being was one of the most important things to them. And because I was a Kiwi, I was able to misspell that into the word arrow. So now at our school, we shoot our arrows of success. Really important for me as a leader, and for the middle leaders and the senior leadership team, that we all understand what success is. Because as we're heading out of our school, rather than just saying we want success, we need to be able to define what success is in our environment. So now, instead of roller coaster ride at our school, we've got a smoother ride that takes our children through our school with some shared beliefs and understandings. If you add teacher collaboration into the mix, you're going to get better outcomes, or whatever your vision statement is. It might be whole order, it might be self-regulation, it might be learning outcomes. In our case, success for every child. If you understand teacher collaboration and you add that into the mix, you're going to get better outcomes. If you understand how to use resources in physical space, you're going to get better outcomes. And by resources, I mean one-to-one devices, teacher aids, and by physical space, whether it's a flexible space or a traditional classroom, whatever you do to make the environment the third teacher. If you understand how to do that, you're going to get better outcomes. And if you understand collaborative teaching or co-teaching and how that can maximise opportunities for children, you're going to get better outcomes. Now, for me as a leader, I want all those things stacked up rather than just an individual teacher trying to interpret what's happening for our school, because I think that gives our children a far better chance of achieving success. And the problem with this result here is, and I might have just knocked it off, no, there it is I did some research just before I came home, and I looked at the NCA Level 1 results across New Zealand in the last year. At a first glance, it doesn't look too bad. Anyone have a guess what the result is across New Zealand for NCA Level 1? It's higher than that. It's about 85%. So that sounds quite good initially, but then what they don't include in the data is the amount of children who never actually sat NCA Level 1 or who I diverted away from it, and that was another 12%. So it brings down our achievement rate with the system we've got at the moment to about 73%. 73% of NCA is our measure of success. I don't know about you, but that wouldn't be the percentage I'd want to have for my children leaving my school and saying that's success. And primarily, and this is me sort of giving a little bit of pushback to the people who say that FLEs or ILEs or collaborative teaching doesn't work, my question is, well, is that success? Because what's happened across New Zealand up until now has predominantly been teachers working on their own and trying to figure it out by themselves. Here's some interesting data from Marzano. And in here, you can see what difference it makes where you have a highly successful teacher and a highly successful school. So the best a highly effective teacher can do, the best is the one I've just done, 50%, so the child comes in at the 50th percentile. The best that they can do if they work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, non-stop, is hope to achieve 63% when the child leaves. And again, I'm wanting more than that. So if we're looking at highly effective schools and highly effective teachers, in other words, they're collaborative schools with really good teaching practice, then you can hope to achieve 98%. Now, I don't know about you, but that's what I would prefer to aim for our students. I'd want them, whatever measure we're using, for most of our children to leave and be successful. And the key to it is teacher collaboration. And a benefit, if you can make it happen at your school, is co-teaching. So, what's our focus? What do we need to consider here? On the right-hand side, we've got the building blocks that I think every school needs to have in place if they want a successful outcome for their students. And on the left-hand side, my thesis results, which showed shared beliefs and understanding and student-centeredness are the most important things. While I was doing my thesis and working with teachers, I created a number of continuums to ask the question, what does it look like if we're just starting on this, and what does it look like if we're at the end of it? So, does your school currently have any definitions of what quality teaching and learning looks like that are shared beliefs across your school? Have you nailed it down and said, this is what it looks like? Because we can talk till we're blue in the face about vision statements, and we can talk about all sorts of things, but actually what counts is what goes on for your children in your classroom. So what I'd like you to do for just a moment, and sorry, I forgot to do this at the beginning, if you haven't introduced yourself to the people at your table, can you do so? Because throughout the session you're going to be doing a little bit of chatting. What I'd like you to do is have a chat at your table about what shared expectations or understandings you have at your school about quality teaching and learning. So can you introduce yourself and have a brief chat? Oh, and Joan Dalton said to me the best thing to do to get you back is to do this at the end. So please have a chat. So setting up as a new principal again in Hong Kong, I've had a chance to revisit these ideas, my own ideas and the ideas of other people as I went around New Zealand pinching the gems from around the country. So my challenge was, well, how do I do this, and should I come in and talk about what effective pedagogy is? And I realised it would probably be a bad idea. So I'm going to share with you 2 strategies that we've used at Kowloon Junior School to establish what effective pedagogy is and start to build a base in our KJS way about how things tick at our school. The things that should be noticeable, should be different and unique to our school. And the first of it is a schooling improvement team that we established. And I borrowed this idea from a colleague up the road. And schooling improvement teams typically involve one leader. The staff get to choose what team they want to be in, so they all had to be in a team. They would meet every 3 weeks after school. There would be advocates from each year group, and it went for about 6 to 10 months. It had to impact, what they were doing had to impact on teaching and learning, not surprisingly, had to align with our vision, and it needed to be kept simple, because if we're doing lots of these school and improvement teams and everyone's bringing it back to their teams, a great way to overload everyone. And I have to say that the process was relatively successful. There were regular feedback going to the teams. It was relatively successful. The 3 things we looked at were well-being, and that what was really successful doing this is we did this a year in advance of when we were actually going to launch into well-being focus, so it gave us lots of time to prepare. The second one was maths, and the third one was literacy. And it was moderately successful. I don't think the people on the maths or the literacy teams were particularly excited about being there. And what they did create was a set of co-constructed expectations. So we could say, well, this is what maths should look like at our school, which is significantly different to what maths looks like across our foundations. So it was really important we established this, but I sort of felt like it was sort of just going through the motions, and it wasn't a particularly exciting thing for people to be involved in. We had been involved in something called learning sprints, Simon Breakspear's learning sprints. Has anyone heard of those? Okay, well that's handy. It's a very intense focus on children's learning for 30 days where you focus on 2 or 3 children and you get right down to some fine detail and the team works together to solve some problems. So we'd been doing that as a staff. And I thought, well, if we can do that with children's learning, and we've been doing schooling improvement teams, how about we combine the 2 ideas? So we came up with a sprint sit, which doesn't make sense because you don't usually sprint while you're sitting, but it made sense for us because it was going to be this. It was going to be no leader. People had to express interest to be in a group. They had 30 days to sort out a problem of practice. They had to do research. They had to consult stakeholders. They had 3 days released, which they could use in 3 blocks, or they could do 6 half days. It usually involved 3 people. Once it was 4. There was explicit criteria about the process that they had to go through. It was a mistake enabled because sometimes our sprint sits came up with a big, that didn't work. And they had to report back to middle leadership using a 7-3 protocol, so 7 minutes to talk, 3 minutes of questions. This is, in itself, has been the most significant and powerful change process I've ever used in any of the schools I've led. The teams who did this work really have made significant change to the school. And they've created, and the last thing is we used HBDI to put the teams together. So I didn't want 3 people with big idea thinking to be working together, or 3 people who are just into data, or 3 people who are just into systems, or 3 people who just love children. I didn't want them working together. We needed a mix. And as I say, they have changed Kowloon Junior School in 2 years in ways that I couldn't possibly have dreamed of. And what they were looking at was, one of them was student voice, choice and ownership, or agency. Another one was looking at e-learning. Another one was looking at environment, the third teacher, awakening the clicking giant. Another one was looking at play. And environment, the third teacher, awakening the sleeping giant within. And the results of what these people created has been absolutely stunning. They were asked to do, the top 1, 2, 3, 4 were outstanding success. The bottom one, I accidentally put 3 people who are very data and systems based, and they came up with a reporting system that was very data and systems based, and that didn't get accepted by the rest of the staff. But the other people have actually changed our skills in ways that I couldn't possibly think of. Now, why I'm sharing this with you, because I think this is the key to collaboration. One, it's giving people time 2, it's respecting them by saying you don't have to do this after the school day. 3, it's saying you don't actually need a leader on your group, you can figure stuff out yourself. And 4, all you need to do is come back to us with some sort of suggestion about how we might make our school better. And they certainly did. And that's all then gone into a KGSLA, which is a Google site, which tells people about how teaching and learning can occur at our school. And the school is changing as I watch through an organic process rather than Neill standing up front saying we need to do it this way or bring in some What I realised is we have such outstanding expertise in our staff, it's just a matter of drawing that collaborative expertise and empowering these people to work together. So it now sits on our site and there's amazing resources for our staff to access to improve teaching and learning at the school. So, focusing on the bottom of the foundation. Team meetings. One of my contentions is that what's happening in our teams is a total waste of time. It's a waste of your teacher's time, it's probably a waste of your time. So much of what's happening when our teams meet together is not particularly helpful. Because Hattie suggests that this should be happening. We should be working collectively and collaboratively to understand the impact of what we're doing. That's not what I'm noticing. I didn't notice it here, and I haven't noticed it in Hong Kong. Giovanni says that this should be the most amazing thing happening when teachers work together. What I'd like you to do is have a read of his quote and have a conversation with the person next to you about the key words that stand out when you look at Giovanni's quote. What I notice most teams doing in their collaborative time, it's just up there in one word. And the word that seems to be what most teams do is plan. They spend most of their time planning for what's coming up. And if you look at what we're supposed to be doing, we're supposed to be analysing the impact of what we do. And yet all we do is plan what's coming next week or next unit or the next 2 weeks or next 3 weeks. And we're missing the gold that should be happening in our teams. So that's my contention. Can you just have a conversation? What do your teams, from your understanding, because I'm sure you're at the meetings occasionally, what do they spend most of their time doing? Can I have a show of hands that, being brutally honest, most of your teams spend time doing administration or planning? And how about teams that spend time doing moderation? It's a swear word in Hong Kong too, so I'm sure it's still a swear word here. What I've noticed is that most of the time is administration. Oh, sorry, and the other thing they've spent a whole lot of time doing is around behaviour, isn't it? And talking about what's going on in their spaces. But very little of the time is spent doing what we need to do, which is reflection. And reflecting on the quality of teaching and learning that's going on in our classrooms. So your whole goal or your vision statement is to achieve this, yet the conversations that your teams are having when they're supposed to be collaborating aren't the conversations you need them to have. So I think we need to repurpose our meetings and dedicate time to talking about the things that actually count, getting them to bring along exemplars, getting them to problem solve together about what actually happened over the last week and what was successful and not. Getting them to talk about the things that were an absolute abysmal failure and the things that were fantastic and talking about how that happened. Getting them to talk about student voice. So what do the students say? So can I ask a question? Can I have a show of hands that in your teams regularly bring back some form of student voice about the learning that's happened in the last week? So we're probably looking at about 5% of the room, and yet that's one of the most important factors, and we don't bring it to the team. How about another question? How many of you actually bring students along to the team meeting so the students can talk about what's happened for them in the last week? Steady on. It's worth considering. The meetings should be about feedback for our practice, but usually the meetings are just talking about the shit that's been going on, and then the week ahead or the next 2 weeks ahead, or some admin or some putting stuff on computers. And very little is about the job of our teachers, which is about changing the lives of our children and helping to achieve the vision for your school. So my challenge is to repurpose your meetings so that there is time set aside to talk about what's happened in the week that's gone or the day that's gone, rather than just always thinking about what's coming next. Because if we keep on doing what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always got. Not much is going to change for your children. It's not surprising that we get to the end of the year and not much has changed, because we're not actually talking about what's happening. The whole purpose of collaboration is that people start to korero. They start to talk with one another, which is why one teacher working on their own is quite hard. But when you bring people together, and if you can build a sense of trust in your team, those conversations are absolutely gold. And when a teacher can put a piece of writing on a table, and this is not moderation, and saying, this is what my children were able to achieve, or this child was able to achieve last week, and a colleague can go, why and how, because it didn't work in my class, that's when you start to change the game for your teachers and for your students. And we're very strong in our school about having some norms and protocols about how our meetings work. I suspect that most teachers really don't feel excited about going to team meetings. They're not thinking, woohoo, can't wait for our planning time. And yet, if we repurpose them so that they can get the benefit of that time, I think they would. So if you haven't come across the norms of collaboration, what I love about them is they're simple at the front and complex behind. And most teachers would say that one of the things they need to work on, can you have a guess which one most teachers would want to work on? Number one, because most teachers like to talk. Gets a bit sad though at a meeting when everyone's sitting there in silence because we're all practicing pausing. But the norms of collaboration are really helpful to get some protocols in place so that we can talk about learning and support one another to be better teachers. So what I'm suggesting to you is what we need to bring back into our schools is a strong sense of reflection and talking about what's been happening for our children in their learning and get their voice in it as well. And I can't believe there's only 7 minutes left, so I'm going to have to go faster. So, skill development. If you want a collaborative team, they need some skills to help them. And what I'm fascinated is teachers often say, we've got the dream team. Ours is the absolute best team. And when I dig a bit deeper, I think they get a bit confused. It's because they enjoy being together. But what should a dream team be? A dream team should be the team that is achieving the vision and the shared beliefs of your school. That should be it. In that case, it's probably going to be a bit of a stroppy team at times, particularly if you put people together who don't like being together. They should be achieving our vision and purpose. And these are some of the skills that they need and protocols that you need to have in place if you want a dream team. The kite that they need. They need interpersonal skills, communication skills, protocols about how each meeting is going to run and stuck to, agreements about how we're going to talk to one another, and a clear sense of purpose about why we're meeting together. Otherwise, it just drives them crazy. So, you need to ask these questions. What are the skills? What are the skills needed to collaborate? What skills are needed to collaborate effectively? And how do you create learning-focused conversations in your team? And what are the interpersonal skills that you might want? So, the way that we do it is by using HBDI, and I didn't explain it because it's not an HBDI course, but the yellow is the big picture thinkers, the blue is data and analytical thinkers, not many of those in primary schools, which is why primary school teachers, I think, feel so exhausted so often, because they've been asked to do something that's not their natural bent, to analyse. Most teachers sit in the red quadrant, which is relational, or the green one, which is systems. So we need to empower our middle leaders to help those team meetings to be highly successful. The last thing we should ever call them is planning meetings. We need to repurpose the whole language around them. We need to introduce norms into our team and reintroduce reflection. And what we suggest at Kowloon Junior School is we set aside really small amounts of time, so 15 minutes only in a stand-up meeting to talk about one practice that we've had in the last week, a shared practice, bringing along evidence and having a conversation and then supporting and challenging each other so that we do become better teachers. And on Friday once a week we meet together with buddies who aren't in our teams and we have conversations about our norms, about how we've been working in our teams and about our school-wide focus. And then we just celebrate what's going on in our school every Friday morning for 15 minutes. So, another question for you. What have you done to build the collaborative skills of your teachers in your school so that they can work together? Other than saying you're in the Year 2 team or the Year 3, 4 team, other than that, what have you done to build the skills? Can you have a conversation with the person next to you and wonder, where might you be on this continuum? When we were in Christchurch and we were going through the earthquakes and the traumatic time that happened, the reason why our school was successful at negotiating those really, really difficult waters is because I used the HBDI communicator. You as principals and leaders in your school will have a particular dominance in the way you think. That will come across in how you do your communications. Whether it's a presentation, a newsletter, anything that you send to parents will come from your dominance. And that can be problematic, particularly if you have a very strong dominance in one area. So what I suggest for anyone is just Google whole brain thinking communicating tool, and whenever you're writing your newsletter or any other communication you're doing to parents, have a look and see that you've covered the 4 quadrants. Because if you're sending a newsletter home and you're highly relational and your parent is an accountant or a statistician, they probably want some data analysis in there. So just be conscious that the way we communicate comes from our dominance. Okay, quick fire. Do ILE, MLE, FLS, FLE, any other name you want to give these things, do they make a difference to teaching and learning? Does it make learning better for children to be in an ILE? Can I have a show of hands for yes? And a show of hands for no? And a show of hands for no idea? Good. Well, the no ideas have it because the right answer is yes and no. Because a building doesn't change things. Now here's the problem we've got, and I'll cover it really quickly. When the Ministry of Education invented MLE term, they did it based on building code. So an MLE was simply a building that was glazed in a certain way and had a certain amount of walls and a roof and stuff like that. The problem was that the system they used was no different to the open plan era. So they got a bit embarrassed when they found out and said, oops, it can't be a modern learning environment, let's call it an innovative learning environment. Problem is they didn't change their criteria. So probably the term doesn't help us, so my suggestion is don't use those terms. Just talk about a quality learning environment or whatever your vision for your school is, because it's what happens inside the space. And these things used to drive me nuts to think that these things existed. And I have, MLP, does anyone know what MLP stands for? No, it doesn't. It's motivating little people. There's no such thing as modern learning practice. Most of them are sad, and most of them are nonsense, and most of them are really great if you want to mess with your parents' heads and not bring them on board. So I suggest don't use them. Don't use them unless you're really clear about what they mean, otherwise you might look like Jack yourself after you've had a few parent meetings. Click. Do traditional schools make a difference to teaching and learning? Yes and no. It's about the people who are inside this space, and I'm going to have to finish it there. What I can say is that when you get people working together and you can support them to be collaborative, and you've got clarity about the vision of your school, and you can give them the skills to be more effective working with one another, you'll make a greater difference for your children. Thank you.